Hello again to this video clip series, My Journey to God in a Very Secularized World. We've been going through a meditation of a French priest in the Married Movement of Priests, Father Larac, and in an article that, in a meditation that he gave, basically in 2015 or 16, with the title of The Subtle and Powerful Attack on the Eucharist. So he explains the strategy, how they're attacking the Eucharist and to diminish the faith of the Catholics in the Eucharist. So here he continues, he says, then I add, as Don Stefano Gobi used to say, do not be surprised if Satan has succeeded in sifting you, in biting the heel of Mary, which we are, making us fall into his snares. Do not be discouraged. Come to confession and re-begin, more confident of our mercy of our friend, Jesus, in order to be more compassionate towards our sheep. All this to tell you that in the Mass, as sacrifice, we live our own mystery, inviting all to the marriage of the Lamb, and by finding our joy in the sacrifice of ourselves together with Him. Humanity belongs to you, Jesus. You have entrusted it to me. However, you must grow in their heart, but I must decrease in the joy of seeing humanity go to you. Today it is necessary to put in greater light the value of the Holy Mass. And this was from a writing of the value of the priesthood, the value of baptism. The Holy Mass as a sacrifice. And then he reads a message of Our Lady here. He says, from Our Lady here says, in the Eucharist, Jesus Christ is truly present with His glorified body and His divinity. And so, ecclesiastical masonry, in many and subtle ways, seeks to attack the ecclesial devotion towards the sacrament of the Eucharist. It gives value only to the meal aspect, tends to minimize its sacrificial value, seeks to deny the real and personal presence of Jesus in the consecrated host. In this way, there are gradually suppressed all the external signs which are indicative of faith in the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist, such as genuflections, hours of public adoration, and the holy custom of surrounding the tabernacle with lights and flowers. That was a message of 13 June 89. And then Father Larac continues, he says, thank you, Mary, for opening our eyes to these problems. They are not matters of taste or liturgical sensibility in the Church. No, they are a real attack against the Eucharist. All these ways of putting Jesus aside, to put the tabernacle on the side and often lower than the chair of the celebrant, which is often put at the center, big and wide as a prince. To make brown instead of white hosts. They make them crumbly instead of compact, always with many fragments, of which no one cares about, taking large hosts, which then must be divided, with many drawbacks. Then I suffer, and in so many masses that I live touring the world, the systematic simplification of the offertory, or the purification after communion. Even there, a way to despise the signs of respect to Eucharistic Jesus. It would be necessary to read again well and obey the document of the Church called Redemptionis Sacramentum of the Congregation of the Divine Worship, 2004. He continues, he says, if one wants to make the Eucharist respected, genuflections, etc., you become easily labeled as a traditionalist, a fundamentalist, a retarded person behind the times. There is need, the defender, in order to not let ourselves become disturbed by all these accusations. You know that in the Bible, the accuser is Satan, and the defense of the advocate, is the name that Jesus gives to the Holy Spirit in the speech after the Last Supper, which he announces the hatred of the world against his disciples, the disciples. One is no longer talking about taste or liturgical sensitivity. One is talking about the greatest eschatological attack of the end times. This is a conviction that I tried to present in my circular letter of 2015. The Antichrist must substitute himself for the true Christ in the church. Where is the same Christ, our Passover? You can find in Catechism 1324. In the church, where is it? In the Eucharist. In the Eucharist is the answer. Thus, the fight is focused on the mystery of the Eucharist. In 2 Thessalonians 2:3-4, it reads that the Antichrist exalts himself against every so-called God or object of worship that is above the Eucharist. He never does it openly, but always with subtle ambiguity, so that in the end the Antichrist will succeed in abolishing the sacrifice, as it's written in Daniel 12:11. And then again he repeats what a lady said. She said, by accepting the Protestant doctrine, people will hold that the Mass is not a sacrifice, but only a sacred meal. That is to say, a remembrance of that which Jesus did at his Last Supper. Message of December 31, 92. And he continues here, it is worth our while to look again at the entire paragraph in the Blue Book. And then he quotes here a message of Our Lady. He said, Our Lady says, the fourth sign of the end times is the horrible sacrilege perpetuated by him who sets himself against Christ, that is, the Antichrist. He will enter into the holy temple of God and will sit on his throne and have himself adored as God. And Our Lady then cites St. Paul. This one will oppose and exalt himself against everything that men adore and call God. And then he continues, he says, what is it that men adore and call God, if not Jesus and the Eucharist? For me, St. Paul announces the attack in the end times against the Eucharist. And here he quotes St. Paul. He says, St. Paul writes, the lawless one will come by the power of Satan, with all the force of false miracles and pretended wonders. He will make use of every kind of wicked deception in order to work harm. That was 2 Thessalonians 2:4-9. And Jesus himself speaks this also. And then here in Matthew, Jesus says, one day you will see the holy place, he who commits the horrible sacrilege. The prophet Daniel spoke of this. Let the reader of Daniel seek to understand. That was Matthew 24:15. And then another quote from Daniel. Beloved children, in order to understand in what this horrible sacrilege consists, read what has been predicted by the prophet Daniel. Then he quotes Daniel here. Go, Daniel. These words are to remain secret and sealed until the end time. Many will be cleansed, made white and upright, but the wicked will persist in doing wrong. Not one of the wicked will understand these things, but the wise will comprehend. Now from the moment that the daily sacrifice is abolished and the horrible abomination is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he who waits with patience and attains 1,335 days. That was from Daniel 12:9-12. And then he says, then Our Lady explains the sense of the prophecies of Daniel. Our Lady says, the Holy Mass is the daily sacrifice, the pure oblation which offered to the Lord everywhere, from the rising of the sun to its going down. And then he says also, and here Our Lady refers to a passage in the Bible, Malachi 1:11, used in the Eucharistic prayer number 3, which goes like this. The sacrifice of the Mass renews that which was accomplished by Jesus on Calvary, By accepting the Protestant doctrine, here is used the excuse of the value of ecumenism. People will hold that the Mass is not a sacrifice, but only a sacred meal. That is to say, a remembrance of that which Jesus did at his Last Supper, and thus the celebration of the Holy Mass will be suppressed. And then he continues, and no one will see. We'll stop right here. May God bless you, and Mary guide you.